The key to mystery is the characters. People buy and read mysteries, especially series mysteries, because of the characters. As opposed to, say, fantasy, where you pick up the next fantasy because you want to visit the world. Right? Game of Thrones, the opening is a map. You're visiting a world. Backstrom is about a character, Backstrom. Mysteries are about character, and that's the first thing that you have to get right. Once you've got the character right, then it becomes a toss-up between setting and the plot itself. And I would say of the two, setting is actually more important than the plot. In the end, the mystery itself, the thing where you said, oh, wouldn't it be cool to kill someone at a conference? Could have been anywhere, actually. The plots in a mystery, they have to hang together. They have to make sense. When I write them, I want the reader to feel like they were trying to solve a puzzle they could have almost just got, and then when they don't get it, but then they see how it fits together, they get a sense of completion, that they understand all the pieces. So to me, if you can combine character and setting and then have that sense of like, oh, I see how this fits at the end, then you've got a great mystery.
Character, motives. What is unique in, not necessarily in how the victim is killed, but in why and what the emotions are behind it, what the backstory is. You also have to have several characters of possible suspects. And they also have to have MOM, missed motive, opportunity, and method. And only one of them is going to be the murderer, probably.
I love writing murder mysteries because I can kill all those people in Paris that are rude. No. I like the fact that it's a way to tell a story and to make it current. For me, the murder itself is, it's not so important, of course, but it's about how the murder affects the people around it. It's like, you know, you throw a stone in the pond and it's the ripple effect. It's the victim's, family, co-workers, neighbors, everyone's affected. You know, once that line is crossed in murder, there's so many social implications, emotional implications, and that's what's interesting to explore with people and to use the murder as sort of a technique to get into the life of people whose life has been disturbed forever. Well, when I was beginning writing, I thought that's how you did it. You started at the end and you worked your way backwards. It didn't seem to work for me. So then I started at the beginning. But it's all about knowing who, I think you need to know who your villain is, the murderer, the person who commits the crime, because they are orchestrating the whole book. Because it's because a murder was committed. We enter this story usually there when the crime happens. And it's about, a good villain is putting obstacles and roadblocks for the person working on the crime or not to be found out. So they're kind of orchestrating it, really, and the detective usually or the police are usually a step behind or trying to catch up. And so once you know that, then you can sort of start at the beginning and think of what led when the books start. Usually in my books, we start pretty soon with a murder. They're all murder in, right? So usually there's a whole backstory that I write maybe, for myself, and then I start where the action happens, where the crime is discovered. So the murderer has been very active behind the scenes, but we don't meet him or her until later. And once I know the villain's motive, what the villain is willing to do to keep undiscovered, then I can put more roadblocks. It's the villain's kind of, what do I want to say, helming the ship in a way.
I knew a few things, but I didn't do a detailed outline. I'm what I consider and what people consider a seat of the pants writer. We call them pantsers as opposed to plotters or outliners. So I knew a few things going in. I knew who the victim was. I knew it was a dead driver. I knew he was experienced, and I knew what kind of person he was. I knew why he became the victim, why he was killed, and I knew why Kate Reilly, my protagonist, the race car driver, was compelled to be involved in the investigation. That's sort of one of the keys for an amateur sleuth, is you've got to have a reason for someone like a race car driver to continually stumble over dead bodies and feel like she has to do something about it. So I knew a bit about the victim and my protagonist. I knew the setting, but I didn't know a lot of the details. So I started with simply those pieces, and I sat down and wrote, and just sort of tried to think what would happen as she went along, and things developed. I saw one writer that talked about the act structure, the structure of a novel, and described it in a way I liked, that was, for mysteries, 3 disasters and a resolution. And because that sort of gives you a sense of, you've got to have the crime to start with. Usually, you stumble over the dead body very early. But you need to have sort of escalating crises and dramas that build to the peak, and then you can resolve it, and, then have the explanation at the end. Once you have internalized this enough, once your brain understands that structure enough, it's going to come out whether you plan it or not. And honestly, that's about the only explanation I can give, is I have spent a lifetime reading fiction, and particularly mysteries. And I sat down to write this book and did some version of that sort of without really intending to. I've likened it to sort of filling up my creative well enough that what came out was the kind of rhythm a book like that needs to be. Now, I will say that I went back, I had drafted the novel, and then I went back and worked with an editor who said, well, you need this and the other thing. And so then I did a detailed outline. Once I had a full draft, I did a detailed outline chapter by chapter and decided, okay, I'm going to add another subplot, and here's where exactly I'm going to weave it in. I'm going to add a couple more clues, and here's where I'm going to put them. So there was some outlining and structure and plotting, but only after I'd really sort of allowed myself, my subconscious, to go and be creative and explore ideas.
I think the most compelling thing about any mystery, whether it's mine or any other authors, for me anyway, as a reader, is the character. So I want to be able to relate to the character. I want to root for the character. I want him to be a little flawed. In my case, in Where I Can See You, Hud Matthews is a detective, and his mother disappeared when he was 8 years old. So he grows up and becomes a detective because he went looking for his mother as a kid, and he's always been looking for his mother. So he learned how to ask questions and that kind of thing. So a compelling character set in the backdrop of a once thriving lakeside community with an amusement park that's no longer running, so you have some atmosphere. It's kind of murky, it's kind of run down, it's moody. So I think those elements, atmosphere, character, and then of course plot. Absolutely, Hud coming back home, trying to find his mother, and getting involved in another murder investigation that may or may not be related to his mother's disappearance. So plot, character, setting, I think, are the most compelling elements of any mystery.
Well, a cozy, if you think of it, it started with Agatha Christie, and Murder, She Wrote is very familiar to TV audiences. It usually is a story that involves an amateur sleuth with a murder, a group of suspects, most of whom know each other, in a limited setting. Very often the sleuth has an interesting occupation. Most of the suspects will know each other in some manner, so interrelationships is very important in this type of story. There's no graphic sex, violence, or bad language, so they're clean stories, and it's really fun to write. Really fun to write a cozy mystery, because you can put humor in, you can put romance in, and readers really like them.
I think it's the surprise ending, the twist. My problem is, and my husband tells me this all the time, we sit down and watch something on TV, and within the first 5 minutes, I'm like, that guy did it, and this is how. He's like, how do you know that? Well, I've read mysteries my whole life. I know the tropes. I know what they do. I know, that the murderer is usually seen in that first 5 minutes. I know that. When something really surprises me, I get so excited. I just was surprised just this summer. I read, Delia Owen, Where the Crawfish Sings, I think it's called. Crawdads. Where the Crawdad Sings. Wonderful book. Wonderful book. She had a little twist at the end, and I was like, oh my God, I love that. I loved it. So, yeah, the twist ending is, I grew up watching things like Twilight Zone and things like that. My own writing, I try to have twist endings in there. I think that's the big thing. What else about mystery and horror? It's different for novels and short stories. Short stories, they're basically plot-driven. So, I can't really get into my characters at that time. The novels, however, you can do all sorts of backstories and all sorts of stuff. So, I think, for both of them, the one thing that's key to both is that twist ending for me.